I have spent my entire life being the invisible shadow to my family's golden child. The ballroom of the luxury hotel in Louisville was filled with the city's elite when my older sister spotted me standing near the technical control booth. She marched up the stairs to the platform in her heavy gown while hundreds of guests watched in stunned silence. She snatched the microphone from the MC's hand with such force that the feedback screeched through the speakers, causing everyone to cover their ears. "What are you doing here?" she screamed, her voice cracking with rage as she pointed a manicured finger at the exit. "Get out of my wedding right now!" Before I could even answer or explain my presence, she swung her hand and slapped me across the face with enough force to make the entire room gasp in shock. My cheek burned where her diamond ring had grazed my skin, but I refused to look away or give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry in front of her wealthy friends. I did not argue with her or try to defend myself against her accusations because I knew the time for talking was officially over. I wiped the smear of red lipstick from my cheek and stared directly into her frantic eyes while I unlocked my phone with a trembling but determined hand. My mother stood frozen in the front row with a look of horror as I calmly pressed the enter button that linked my device to the massive projector screen behind the altar. The romantic slideshow vanished instantly to reveal a photograph that made the groom drop his glass of champagne, shattering the silence. 2 minutes later, the entire hall went silent because everyone was staring at the undeniable proof of her betrayal. Before I tell you the secret that turned this celebration into a crime scene, tell me in the comments, what is the cruelest thing a family member has ever done to you at a major event? Because I am reading every single story you share. 3 weeks before the storm finally broke at the wedding, I was still foolish enough to believe that blood ties actually meant something to these people. I arrived at the engagement party held in the sprawling garden of our family estate, clutching a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. Inside the humble wrapping was an antique oak music box that belonged to our late grandmother, who had made me promise on her deathbed to give it to my older sister Amber on her wedding day. The garden was filled with expensive floral arrangements and guests holding crystal champagne flutes, making my modest gift look incredibly out of place among the luxury. I waited for a moment when the photographers were looking away before I approached the head table where the bride-to-be was holding court. Amber took the box with a wide and seemingly genuine smile that lit up her face as she exclaimed how much she appreciated the thoughtful gesture. She hugged me tightly in front of the watching guests and whispered that she would treasure it forever before placing it carefully on the table behind her. I walked away, feeling a rare sense of warmth and relief because I thought we had finally shared a real sisterly moment after years of distance. I moved through the crowd to get a drink, but barely 5 minutes later, my cousin Jenny came rushing up to me with a look of absolute panic on her face. Jenny grabbed my arm tightly and whispered urgently that I needed to go to the kitchen service area immediately because something terrible had just happened. She told me that the moment I turned my back, Amber's smile had vanished instantly, and she had tossed the package directly into the garbage bin without even opening it. A wave of nausea hit me because that box was the only thing our grandmother had left to remember her by. My heart pounded against my ribs as I navigated through the catering staff to the service area, where the large waste bins were hidden behind a silk screen. I felt a physical ache in my chest when I saw the beautiful oak wood stained with half-eaten appetizers and champagne residue inside the bin. I reached into the mess to rescue the heirloom, wiping the grime from the delicate carvings with the hem of my dress, while tears of frustration welled up in my eyes. While I was standing near the service entrance trying to clean the box, I heard a hushed but frantic voice coming from the cracked window of the guest bathroom nearby. I recognized the tone immediately, but it lacked the arrogant confidence Amber usually displayed when she was performing for an audience. I pressed myself against the exterior wall to listen, my breath hitching in my throat as the conversation became clearer and the reality of the situation began to unfold. "Lance, listen to me right now." Amber hissed into the phone with a desperation that chilled me to the bone because she sounded completely cornered. The doctor said the pregnancy is already 8 weeks along, but you need to disappear for a while. My hands shook so violently that I almost dropped the music box again as I struggled to process the words coming from the other side of the wall. She paused to listen to the person on the other end before snapping back. You have to hide until I marry that idiot Travis, because I need his family's money to support us. The realization hit me harder than any physical blow because I understood exactly what she was planning to do to her fiancé. My sister was not just being ungrateful about a sentimental gift. She was orchestrating a massive fraud to pin another man's child on a decent guy who loved her. I stood there in the shadows of the garden clutching the soiled music box, knowing that the innocent family dynamic I thought we had was completely shattered. Travis was a good man from a respectable family who believed he was marrying the love of his life, but he was actually walking into a trap set by a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a bank account. I knew in that moment that I could not simply wash the stain off the box and pretend that I hadn't heard the truth about the monster living under my roof. 2 days after the disastrous engagement party where I discovered the truth about my sister's deception, I decided that I could not simply sit back and watch an innocent man be destroyed by her lies. I arranged to meet my best friend Sarah at a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town, where we could speak freely without the risk of running into anyone from my family's social circle. I sat in the corner booth nervously shredding a paper napkin while I recounted every sickening detail of the conversation I had overheard between Amber and her secret lover in the garden. Sarah listened with intense focus as I explained how Amber planned to trap her fiancé into a marriage based on fraud, and her expression shifted from shock to a hardened resolve that mirrored my own feelings. We both knew that simply telling the groom what I heard would be a disaster, because my word would never stand against the manipulative charm of my sister. I decided to take a massive financial risk by withdrawing nearly all of the savings I had scraped together from my job over the last few years. I took that envelope of cash to a private investigator's office located in a nondescript building downtown because I needed a professional who could gather evidence without being spotted by my paranoid sister. I gave the investigator a recent photo of Amber along with her vehicle information and instructed him to document every single place she visited and every person she interacted with during the week. The waiting period was excruciating as I paced around my small apartment, wondering if I had just thrown away my life savings for nothing, but the results came back faster than I expected. Just 24 hours after I hired him, the investigator sent a secure digital folder to my email containing a series of high-resolution photographs that made my stomach turn. The images showed Amber driving her luxury convertible into the parking lot of a dilapidated motel on the outskirts of the city, where drug deals were more common than overnight guests. In the grainier shots taken from a distance, she was seen arguing heatedly outside room number 4 with a man who looked like he hadn't showered in days. He was wearing tattered jeans and a stained t-shirt which stood in stark contrast to Amber's designer dress, marking him clearly as the man she was trying to hide from her respectable fiancé. I immediately called Sarah over to my apartment to review the evidence, because I needed a second pair of eyes to confirm that what we were seeing was actually happening. Sarah studied the photographs spread across my kitchen table with a critical eye before shaking her head slowly in disappointment. She pointed to the image of the man grabbing Amber's arm and looked up at me with a serious expression that dampened my initial excitement about catching them. "Dawn, if you just show these blurry photos to the family, your mother will tear you apart," Sarah warned me with brutal honesty as she tapped her finger on the glossy paper. "They will say it is a Photoshop, or just a misunderstanding where she was trying to help an old friend in need." I slumped back in my chair because I knew deep down that Sarah was absolutely right about how my family would react to circumstantial evidence. My mother would find a way to spin the narrative to protect Amber's reputation, and I would be painted as the jealous younger sister trying to sabotage the wedding out of spite. The photos proved she was meeting a secret man, but they did not prove the pregnancy that was the cornerstone of her entrapment scheme. I realized that to stop this wedding and save my future brother-in-law, I needed something irrefutable like medical records or a confession about the baby that could not be explained away. Just as we were formulating a new plan to get deeper into Amber's secrets, my phone began to vibrate violently on the table with a call from the one person I wanted to avoid. I looked down to see the caller ID flashing Mom and felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my chest before I swiped to answer. My mother did not even bother to say hello before she launched into a tirade about my absence from the wedding preparations. She was completely oblivious to the fact that her precious daughter was currently cheating on her fiancé in a cheap motel room while she was busy yelling at me. "Why haven't you come over to help your sister prepare for the rehearsal?" My mother, Patricia, snapped into the receiver with her signature tone of condescension. "Don't you dare wear that gloomy face at the wedding and embarrass me in front of our guests." I held the phone away from my ear as she continued to list off the ways I was failing the family, never once asking how I was doing or why I had been distant. I forced myself to apologize in a flat voice because I needed to keep her calm and unsuspecting while I hunted for the real evidence. I hung up the phone with a renewed sense of determination because her cruelty only fueled my desire to expose the rot hiding beneath our family's perfect image. I knew that the next step of the investigation had to be bold, so I texted the private investigator to focus solely on medical appointments regardless of the cost. 1 week before the wedding ceremony was scheduled to take place, the private investigator sent me a GPS location pin that changed everything. I was sitting at my desk pretending to work when the notification flashed across my screen, indicating that my sister and her secret lover were currently at a private medical facility on the quiet side of town. I grabbed my purse and the specialized recording equipment I had borrowed from the investigator, rushing out to my car with a heart that was pounding against my ribs like a sledgehammer. The drive to the clinic felt like an eternity as I weaved through the mid-morning traffic, terrified that I would arrive too late and miss the critical moment that could expose their entire scheme. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, silently praying that luck would be on my side just this once, so I could save an innocent man from a lifetime of deceit. When I finally arrived at the address, I realized it was not a standard hospital, but a discreet, high-end obstetrics clinic tucked away behind tall hedges, the kind of place wealthy people went when they wanted their medical history to remain completely off the record. I spotted Amber's convertible parked near the entrance, so I carefully maneuvered my car into a parking spot across the street, hiding behind a large delivery truck to ensure I remained invisible. I lowered my window just a crack to get a clear view through the telephoto lens of my camera and waited with bated breath for them to emerge from the building. 10 minutes later, the glass doors opened and my sister walked out looking visibly stressed, followed closely by the man I recognized from the motel photos. This was clearly Lance, the man she had been whispering to on the phone, and seeing him in the daylight made the situation feel sickeningly real. He looked completely out of place in the manicured surroundings of the clinic, wearing a faded leather jacket and smoking a cigarette with an aggressive, nervous energy that contrasted sharply with Amber's polished appearance. They stopped right on the sidewalk near her car, and even from a distance I could see that they were engaged in a heated argument that was quickly escalating into a shouting match. I pointed the directional microphone toward them and adjusted the gain, my hands trembling as their voices began to come through my headphones with crystal clarity. Lance threw his cigarette onto the pavement and stepped into Amber's personal space, his body language radiating a mix of fear and anger over the situation they were in. "Are you trying to trick me?" Lance shouted loud enough for the microphone to peak. His face twisted in frustration as he grabbed her arm. "If that guy Travis knows the pregnancy is mine, will he still marry you?" "Amber." I gasped silently inside my car because hearing him confirm the paternity out loud was the final piece of the puzzle I had been searching for. Amber looked around nervously to see if anyone was watching, then she softened her expression and stepped closer to him, changing her tactic from defensive to manipulative. She wrapped her arms around his neck in a loving embrace to calm him down, and in her left hand, she was still clutching the white envelope containing the ultrasound images she had just received. I held my breath and pressed the shutter button on my camera, capturing a rapid sequence of photos that showed her hugging her lover while holding the medical proof of their child. The image was damning on its own, but I knew I needed the audio to be perfect to ensure there was absolutely no wiggle room for her to lie her way out of this. I steadied the long-range recorder as Amber pulled back slightly to look into Lance's eyes, her voice dropping to that sickly sweet tone she used whenever she wanted to get her way. "Just be patient for a little while longer," Amber said, her voice coming through the recording device clear as a bell. "Because after the wedding, I will take his family's money to raise our child. I only love you, Lance." The cold, calculated nature of her confession made my stomach churn with a mixture of disgust and rage. She spoke about Travis, my future brother-in-law, not as a partner or a husband, but as a financial resource to be exploited for the benefit of her and her criminal boyfriend. I looked down at the recording device to ensure the file was saved, feeling the heavy weight of the steel evidence resting in the palm of my hand. I thought about Travis, a man who had always been kind to me and who believed he was starting a family with a woman who loved him. He was walking into a marriage thinking he was the luckiest man alive, completely unaware that he was nothing more than a puppet in a cruel play directed by my sister. I sat in my car for a long time after they drove away, staring at the empty parking spot and realizing that I now held the power to destroy everything Amber had built. It was a terrifying responsibility, but as I replayed her cold confession in my mind, I knew I had no choice but to burn her fantasy world to the ground. 2 days before the wedding ceremony was set to take place, Amber summoned me to the sprawling luxury villa that Travis had just purchased for their new life together. I drove through the massive iron gates hoping that she might finally want to have a moment of sisterly connection before her big day, but I should have known better than to expect kindness from a predator. She met me at the door not with a hug, but with a laundry list of menial tasks that she refused to trust to the hired help because she claimed they were too clumsy to handle her expensive belongings. I spent the next 3 hours acting as her personal servant on my knees, polishing her designer heels and carefully steaming the delicate lace of her reception dress, while she lounged on a velvet sofa sipping imported sparkling water. She treated the entire situation like a royal coronation rather than a marriage, talking endlessly about the first-class flights to Paris and the exclusive country clubs she would finally have access to once the ring was on her finger. She strutted around the room in her silk robe, waving her hand in front of my face to catch the light with the massive diamond that sat heavy on her finger, forcing me to admire the symbol of her successful deception. She clearly enjoyed seeing me sweating over her luggage while she relaxed, viewing my submission as proof that she had won the lifelong competition she created between us. Amber laughed, a cruel, hollow sound that echoed off the marble walls, and sneered. "Look closely at this ring, Dawn, because you could work your miserable little job for 100 years and never touch this level of class." I bit my tongue and continued folding her silk scarves, waiting patiently for the moment when her vanity would provide me with the opening I desperately needed. She eventually got bored of tormenting me with her words and decided she needed to try on her main wedding gown one last time to ensure the fit was absolutely perfect for the cameras. As soon as the heavy oak door to the master bedroom clicked shut behind her, I dropped the facade of the obedient sister and moved continuously toward the marble kitchen island where her personal laptop sat open. The screen was already logged into the wedding planning portal, which included the cloud drive link for the massive projector system that would display their love story video during the reception. My heart raced against my ribs as I quickly navigated to the system settings and installed a remote desktop application that mirrored the display control directly to my smartphone. I worked with the precision of a surgeon, hiding the application icon deep inside a system subfolder so that no one would notice anything had changed until it was far too late to stop me. Just as I finished syncing the devices, Amber's cell phone, which she had carelessly left beside the computer, buzzed loudly with an incoming notification that lit up the entire screen. I glanced down and felt a jolt of adrenaline when I saw the name Lance appear, followed by a preview text that was short, brutal, and terrifyingly clear about his intentions. He was demanding $10,000 in cash be delivered to him immediately, or he promised to show up at the altar and introduce himself and the truth to Travis and his wealthy parents. This message was the final confirmation that my plan was not just necessary, but it was the only way to ensure the explosion happened on my terms rather than his. I placed the phone back exactly where it was and stood up just as Amber walked out, twirling in her white gown, looking like a princess from a fairy tale but hiding the soul of a villain. I looked at her with a calm expression that she mistook for admiration, but inside, I was already visualizing the moment her house of cards would fall. The rehearsal dinner took place at an exclusive riverside restaurant that was glittering with hundreds of string lights reflecting off the dark water below. The entire evening felt like a meticulously choreographed stage play where every laugh was rehearsed and every toast was filled with empty platitudes about eternal love. My mother, Patricia, floated through the room in a gown that rivaled the bride's greeting guests, with a radiant enthusiasm that suggested she believed this celebration was actually about her own social standing. She moved from table to table, accepting compliments on the lavish decor, completely ignoring the fact that the money paying for this extravagance was being stolen from the family she was smiling at. I stood near the edge of the room holding a glass of sparkling water, trying to make myself invisible, as I watched my family perform their fraudulent roles with terrifying ease. It did not take long for my mother to notice I was not participating in the charade with enough enthusiasm for her liking. She excused herself from a conversation with the judge's wife and steered me forcefully toward a dimly lit corridor near the kitchen entrance where we could not be overheard. Her pleasant social mask dropped the instant we were out of sight, replaced by the cold, calculating glare that I had grown up fearing. She loomed over me with an intensity that made me want to shrink away, making it clear that my presence was barely tolerated and strictly conditional. Patricia dug her manicured finger sharply into my shoulder and hissed through her clenched teeth. I am warning you right now that you will sit at the very last table tomorrow. Do not dare to step foot on that stage and embarrass your sister. I nodded silently because arguing with her was pointless when she was in this state, but inside I was already planning exactly how I would defy that order. She smoothed her dress and marched back to the party, leaving me alone in the hallway with the stinging reminder that my own mother viewed me as nothing more than a potential liability. I took a few deep breaths to compose myself before returning to the main dining room, where the atmosphere felt suffocatingly heavy with lies. As I made my way toward the exit to escape the noise, I was intercepted by the one person I actually felt guilty about hurting. Travis approached me with a genuine warmth that seemed completely out of place in a room full of sharks. His face flushed with the excitement of a man who thought he was the luckiest guy on earth. He looked handsome and kind in his suit, and it broke my heart to see how completely he trusted the people who were actively plotting to ruin his life. He placed a gentle hand on my arm to stop me from leaving, oblivious to the fact that I was holding the grenade that would blow up his world in less than 24 hours. "Thank you so much for coming tonight, Dawn," Travis said with a soft smile that made my stomach twist with guilt. "I know you and Amber have your differences, but your presence here means the world to both of us." I forced a smile and wished him a good night, walking away quickly because I was terrified that if I stayed any longer, I might break down and tell him everything right there in the middle of the restaurant. I knew that telling him privately would only result in Amber manipulating him into believing I was a liar, so I had to stick to the plan for the truth to be undeniable. I walked out into the cool night air, feeling the weight of the secret pressing down on my chest, desperate to get back to the safety of my apartment. As I walked toward my car in the far corner of the parking lot, a movement in the shadows caught my eye and made me freeze in my tracks. I saw the unmistakable silhouette of Lance leaning against a rusted sedan, smoking a cigarette, and staring intensely at the restaurant entrance like a predator waiting for an opportunity to strike. He was clearly waiting for Amber to emerge, so he could demand the money he had threatened her for proving that the situation was spiraling out of control even faster than I had anticipated. I quickly unlocked my car and drove away before he could notice me, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I realized that tomorrow was going to be even more chaotic than I imagined. I returned to my quiet apartment and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling for hours, clutching the phone that held the evidence of their betrayal. I could not sleep because I knew that when the sun rose over Louisville, I would have to walk into that wedding and destroy my own family to save a good man. 12 o'clock on Sunday arrived with the chime of church bells signaling the beginning of the official wedding ceremony, amidst the fragrance of expensive lilies and the soft melody of a string quartet. The exchange of vows proceeded without a single hitch, presenting a picture-perfect moment that brought tears to the eyes of the gathered socialites who believed they were witnessing a fairy tale. Amber looked absolutely magnificent in her custom designer gown, radiating the beauty of a blushing bride, but I was watching her closely enough to see the cracks in her composure. Her eyes were constantly darting toward the back entrance of the ballroom and scanning the shadows of the gallery, clearly terrified that Lance would burst through the doors at any moment to demand his hush money. She was trembling slightly, not from emotion, but from the sheer terror that her past was about to collide with her future, yet she maintained her frozen smile for the flashing cameras. The reception began with a lavish toast, and eventually, the master of ceremonies announced that it was time to dim the lights for the sentimental love story video montage. I took a deep breath to steady my shaking hands and stepped out from the shadows of the catering station, walking with purposeful strides toward the technical control booth located on the raised platform. The audio technician, whom I had bribed earlier with a generous tip to take a sudden bathroom break, had left the system unlocked and ready for my intervention. I plugged my phone directly into the main console, just as the first few notes of the romantic ballad began to play over the speakers. Amber spotted me standing at the control deck almost immediately, and the color drained from her face as she realized I was not sitting at the back table where my mother had banished me. She abandoned her crystal champagne flute on the head table with a loud clatter and hiked up her heavy skirts, rushing down the stairs and across the dance floor with a look of pure panic in her eyes. She reached the platform in seconds, breathless and frantic, before she lunged at me in front of the confused guests to stop whatever I was planning. This was the moment she screamed at me to leave and delivered the stinging slap that echoed through the silent room, just as I described when I first started telling you this story. I did not utter a single word in response to her violence, because anything I said would have been drowned out by the shock of the audience. I simply wiped the blood from my lip, looked her dead in the eye, and pressed the play button on my phone screen with a cold, unwavering determination. The romantic slideshow that had just started abruptly cut to black, causing a murmur of confusion to ripple through the crowd before the massive 200-inch LED screen flickered back to life. A high-resolution photograph appeared, blown up to a massive size that made every detail agonizingly clear to everyone in the room. It was the image of Amber passionately kissing Lance outside the clinic, with her hand clearly holding the ultrasound image that she had claimed was the first picture of Travis's child. Before the audience could even process the visual evidence of her infidelity, the audio recording I had captured began to play over the concert-quality sound system. Amber's voice, sharp and unmistakably calculating, boomed through the hall, stripping away every layer of her innocent act in a matter of seconds. "Just be patient for a little while longer." Her recorded voice sneered, dripping with contempt. "Because after the wedding, I will take his family's money to raise our child. Travis is just a gold mine for me to dig. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever experienced, as if the air had been sucked out of the room by the sheer weight of the truth. Travis stood alone in the center of the stage, his face draining of all color until he looked like a ghost haunting his own wedding. He stared up at the screen with his mouth slightly open, his mind struggling to comprehend that the woman he adored had viewed him as nothing more than a financial target. He turned slowly to look at Amber, who was now frozen on the technical platform, with her hand still raised from slapping me. You said the baby was mine." Travis stammered into the silence, his voice breaking with a raw pain that made several guests look away in shame. "You lied to me this entire time." Amber opened her mouth to scream a denial, to blame me, or to invent some new lie, but the evidence looming behind her was too massive to dispute. At the very back of the room, near the heavy double doors, I spotted a figure in a hooded jacket who had just slipped inside. It was Lance, who had clearly arrived to execute his blackmail plan, but upon seeing his own face plastered on the giant screen and realizing the scheme was blown, his courage evaporated instantly. He pulled his hood down low over his face to hide his identity from the angry crowd and turned around, sprinting out of the exit and into the parking lot like the coward he was. He knew there was no money left to extort from a woman who had just lost everything, and he had no intention of facing the wrath of Travis's powerful family. The wedding was officially over, but the reckoning was just beginning. 1 month after the wedding disaster, the remnants of the storm were still lingering over the city of Louisville like a heavy fog that refused to dissipate. The scandal had not only destroyed the wedding but had completely incinerated the social standing of the family I used to call my own. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic because Travis's family was not the type to simply forgive such a public humiliation without seeking retribution. They officially filed a massive civil lawsuit against my mother and sister for marriage fraud, demanding the return of every single engagement gift and seeking millions in damages for emotional distress. The legal papers served as the final nail in the coffin for my family's finances, ensuring that they would spend the next decade drowning in debt and courtroom battles. Amber, who once acted like she owned the world and mocked anyone she deemed inferior, was unceremoniously abandoned by Lance the moment he realized the money tap had run dry. He changed his number and skipped town to avoid the legal heat, leaving her completely alone to face the consequences of their scheme. Amber was forced to move out of the luxury villa Travis had bought and is now living in a cramped, rundown rental apartment on the bad side of town with water stains on the ceiling. She faces the terrifying reality of raising a child alone, without a job, a husband, or a single penny to her name, stripped of the arrogance that once defined her. My mother fared no better in the aftermath because the high society circle she valued more than her own children had completely ostracized her. The women she used to drink tea with now crossed the street to avoid her, unwilling to be associated with a woman who tried to trick a respectable family into raising an illegitimate child. Patricia spent her days weeping in her darkening living room, refusing to take responsibility for the monster she raised, and instead blaming the cruel hand of fate for her misfortune. She tried to call me once to demand money, but I simply blocked the number and finally closed the door on that painful chapter of my life. As for me, I finally found the courage to sever the toxic ties that had held me back for 28 years and embraced a life of true independence. I combined my meager savings with the money I earned from selling restored antique heirlooms, including the repaired music box, to open a small independent pharmacy in a quiet neighborhood. I wake up every morning in a modest apartment that feels like a palace because it is filled with peace rather than the constant tension of judgment and manipulation. I have built a new circle of friends who value me